Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our the first of our two-part series on the DIA webinars. I am Jennifer Peters, the Community Engagement Administrator, and I'd like to welcome you to Celebrate Reading with DIA, a conversation between Mark Smith and Pat Morra. I will turn the microphone over to Mark, who is going to get started for us.
Hi, Pat.
Hi, Mark.
This is fun, isn't it?
It is. Mark is one of my favorite people on earth.
Oh, my gosh. Well, we're going to have, this is a mutual admiration society because you're one of my favorite people anywhere, Pat. So, and don't steal my thunder here, because what I want to do is say to everybody that's listening just what a treat you're in for, because Pat Morra is really one of my great inspirations in my professional life. I had the privilege of knowing and working with her since actually Jeanette Larson introduced us maybe over 20 years ago or so at this point. So it has been quite a long association and a very fruitful association, because I have learned such a huge amount from Pat over the years. I have such a profound admiration for what she's done, and tried to help out in whatever way I can to in the libraries that I've worked with to try to promote DIA and so forth. So I'm really happy that our association can continue here today, and as we move ahead to encourage libraries in Texas to participate in Dia de los Niños, Dia de los Libros, which is what we're going to talk about today. So, Pat, if you don't mind, I'm going to just say a couple of words about your writing career to start with, just a couple of things. Do you mind if I do that?
No, but I want to point out to our listeners that if Jeanette introduced us 20 years ago, we were each 5.
Well said. Well, I just, you have a treat today to hear Pat Morra, because she is first and foremost, she is a wonderful, wonderful author. She is the author of many books for children, for young adults, for adults. One of the books that of course I appreciate so much is Tomas and the Library Lady, which tells the story of young Tomas Rivera, who went on to become the Chancellor of UC Riverside in California, and who was also at the University of Texas El Paso, if I'm not mistaken, and had, but that's a story, Tomas and the Library Lady is the story of his experience as a small child of a migrant family, discovering a world of learning and exploration through books and through his local library and librarian. A wonderful book, and that book, Tomas and the Library Lady, won the Tomas Rivera Prize in 1998, a prize named after that same individual, Tomas Rivera. Also, A Library for Juana, which is the story of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, who just a great story about that remarkable individual's life, won the Tomas Rivera Award in 2003. And for all of most of the folks on the call, I believe, are librarians and educators, so I want to make sure that you know about Pat's book, Zing, 7 Creativity Practices for Educators and Students, a really great tool that you can use to basically, I don't know how to say it, but really push the act of teaching and reading and learning to whole new levels. Recently, she has written a book with her daughter, Libby Martinez, I Pledge Allegiance, which has gotten a lot of great attention and great reviews. And Libby is a very dear person as well, and had known Libby when she was on the staff of a state senator back in the 90s. So Libby is somebody we've known and worked with for quite a while too, and so glad that she's now writing as well. And then, of course, I have to mention Book Fiesta Celebrate Children's Day Book Day, which is her book about DIA. It's such a great book and so appropriate to this conversation. But I want to say that the reason that we're talking to Pat today is not because of her amazing literary career. It's because she is such a long-time and tireless advocate of reading and literacy for all children, and with a particular emphasis on multicultural children and families. And of course, her work founding and celebrating Dia de los Niños, starting back in 96-97 period, and a celebration that has gone on to influence literally many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, I would say millions of lives nationally. So that's what we're talking about today. So Pat, what we're going to do is we're going to have a little dialogue, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and we're going to talk around those. Is that okay with you?
Oh, very okay, and thank you for all the kind words, Mark.
Oh, thank you for what you've done for libraries over the years, and for children, more importantly. So, Pat, let's start and just tell everybody here a little bit about yourself and where you grew up and some of the forces and influences that shaped your development.
Well, I was born in El Paso, Texas, right on the border, and of course that has had a profound impact on how I see the world. Also, I come from a very close, loving family. I feel incredibly lucky about that, and a bilingual family, and that was a great gift. I didn't know it at the time. Also, a home where there were always books present. For those of us who have been lucky enough to have grown up with books in our home, I think we sort of take that blessing for granted. And I really didn't begin to appreciate it until early in my years as a writer. I discovered how many children in our country do not have any books in their homes.
That's quite true. And do you care to say anything about the differences between children that grow up in homes where there are books and those that do not?
Well, I think what happens is, for all of us, how we define normal, what is normal, is a reality that evolves, and we're not even aware of it. If you come from a very outdoorsy family, I have a granddaughter now living in Austin, and she has very outdoorsy parents. So I'm sure that for Bonnie, as she grows up, you know, being fit and riding a bicycle and being at the park, that's normal. For children who grow up in apartments in New York City, that may not be normal. Well, the same thing is true with books. If books are a regular part of our lives, whether because of going to libraries or because we actually have home libraries, then that is a natural expectation. I panic before a trip. Am I going to have enough to read on the plane? I mean, it is a big issue for me. So we develop a deep attachment to text.
Very well said. I think our attendees are looking at a picture of you, Pat, where you're standing in your adorable little tweed coat. When and where was this picture taken?
Well, this is
you don't have to give us a year.
No, well, I wouldn't be able to guess a year, but I'm probably about, I don't know, what would you say, 5 years old? But the best thing is, behind me is the rock home that my father had built in El Paso instead of taking my mother on a honeymoon, something that she never considered a great idea. Although, may I say that for all of us who grew up in that home, it was just a prize. And years later, I wrote a memoir for adults called House of Houses, about how, for those of us who grew up in a happy home, that home is a house of houses.
That's a great book and one of my favorites. Now, was it about this era that you discovered reading yourself, or were you already a reader by the time this picture was taken?
You know, when I was a little girl, the idea of being an early reader, I don't think that was even an issue. I just know that, as I said, there were books in the home, and I was one of these fiercely dedicated students. So, and I had wonderful teachers. I happened to go through Catholic schools from K through 12, and all of my teachers were people who loved reading and made us memorize books. So it's very much a part of my experience.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So you were writing well before, several years before you had the idea to develop DIA. Tell us a little bit about how you had the idea to do DIA, and how did your writing influence that?
Well, you know, I think the first book comes out in '84. It's not the first manuscript, but it's the first published book, A Birthday Basket for Tia. And so, you know, like any writer, like my daughter Libby is now, you're just so excited to get out there and share the book. And I noticed a couple of things. I noticed that not everybody was interested in buying books by Latinas, not even Latinas. Now that's '84. I like to think things have changed, but there was that reluctance. I also noticed that the people who came to book events were not as diverse as the people in the communities. And so I had begun to think about this issue. You know, I don't have a degree in library school. I was a teacher for a while. But I began to just be aware that what seemed normal to me and to me as a parent, you know, children's books were such a part of my children's lives. That's why I decided to try writing them. But I began to realize that how many children just did not have that attachment. And then I happened to hear about this custom in Mexico of celebrating El Día del Niño, in the singular, El Día del Niño, on April 30th. And the first image we saw in the webinar of that DIA idea, you know, on the top of my head, yeah. Any of you who know me know that that woman is far better behaved than I will ever be. So that is a drawing that somebody did. But so what happened is that I walked out of the place where I heard it, and it was at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and it was like something hit me over the head, you know, literally. And I thought, well, you know, we have Mother's Day, we have Father's Day, we should have Children's Day, but we need to link it to books. I mean, literacy is essential in our democracy, and we know it. We know it. You know, now more and more they're saying this is the big divide. It's not just technology, it's actually literacy. Mm-hmm. So luckily, some wonderful Reforma members, and we'll talk about a little more about that in a minute, were quickly supportive. And they said, well, let's do it. We'll help you. We'll do it this April. And so that was really DIA's beginning. It was inspired by the celebration in Mexico. Sometimes on the web you'll read that it's a Latin American tradition. It isn't. The whole idea of linking it to literacy, of linking Children's Day to literacy, is something that we have grown here in the United States, and all of us who have done it can take pride in that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and of course you were the inspiration for that. Now, if you were going to explain to someone who had never heard of DIA before, you know, just completely cold, what would you say?
Well, I think if I were chatting, I would talk about the fact that Mother's Day and Father's Day, they're givens in this country. And there probably isn't a school nor a library that would not plan something in June for Father's Day and something in May for Mother's Day. And maybe that can be a story time, or it may be an activity. So Children's Day is a commitment to start that tradition in April. Now, as the visual shows, it's a year-long celebration of reading. So as we began to think about DIA, and you know, organizers ideally grow with the concept. So what is DIA today is not what it was way back 19 years ago, because we've been thinking about it, and we've been deepening our thinking about it, and people like Mark and Jeanette have been part of that. So now we like to say that DIA is a year of creative literacy. And I know that you dedicated librarians and teachers who are joining us, you feel as passionately about this as I do. So you're trying to make, whether it's your story time or your activities, you're trying to have a little zing to them, especially in this incredible time of obsession with testing. So it's creative literacy all year long, and then planning for this culminating April celebration, which is usually April 30th, but you know, you're in control, so if you want to have it on the 25th or whatever works for you and your community, the challenge is to make it annual. Just like we wouldn't not celebrate Mother's Day, we wouldn't not celebrate Father's Day. In April, Children's Day Book Day is on the calendar.
Mm-hmm. And I would also add to that, Pat, that you know I think that there's hardly a library in the state or the nation that would not want to have a summer reading program, and I think that we should want to get to the point where the DIA celebrations are as regular as the summer reading programs, and certainly that was experienced in many of the libraries that I worked with. That once you start it and you begin it, it just becomes your annual event. It's on your calendar, and it's a lot harder the first year, but after that, it's really not that big a deal to add it to your cycle of programming in your library.
And I really appreciate that you mentioned that connection. There is a booklet on my website, and we'll be talking more about it, but it talks about creating your planning committee. And I am not unaware how tired and overworked teachers and librarians are, and I would add underappreciated. And I know that sometimes people can feel, oh, don't tell me that they want me to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
But I like teachers and librarians to think, gosh, this is why I went into this work. This is just what I want. I'm doing a year of celebrating reading and book joy, and then I'm planning some kind of celebration. Now, sometimes that celebration is a special story time, and maybe there's a treat. And sometimes it grows to become a real community celebration. I remember visiting Galveston a couple of years after their last hurricane, and I had a wonderful librarian, you know, who had brought me in, and they did a great job, just a wonderful job. What they did is they had sort of a way to introduce patrons to the library. So as you went to the different stations in the library, you got a stamp, and then at the end you got a book, I think. And then they had piñatas outside, and they had hot dogs. I mean, it was a big event. And it was amazing to see the diversity. I mean, one of my favorites was watching this Asian family, Asian American family, and the grandparents were there, and the parents were there, and the little girl was making this beautiful paper flower. So it was just this fabulous celebration of children and reading. And so a few months later, I happened to email with the librarian, and I said, well, do you think you're going to celebrate DIA next year? And she said, how could we not?
Mm-hmm.
That was one of my best answers, you know. She said, the community expects it. The other thing I would say is don't feel you need to do it alone. I really stress in the planning booklet having a planning committee and involving parents. And I won't talk about it right now, but I do want to come back to that challenge of involving diverse parents.
Okay, we'll hold that thought for a minute, and we'll get, as we move along, we'll get a little bit more into specifics. But I do have another couple of questions. I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about who the allies in this process have been. You mentioned Reforma earlier, and ALSC, the Association of Library Services for Children, which is a division of ALA, has been involved. You want to tell our folks a little bit about the kind of that part of the history of it, and then we'll go back to some of the other more practical things. But I think it's an interesting part of the story.
Well, it's an interesting part, and it's also an essential part. Again, it's very hard for any of us to do most significant things. I mean, sometimes a writer or an artist can do it, but usually, you know, we need partners. Even with something like writing, I need, you know, the partners who are going to publish the book. So I was very fortunate that when the idea first came to me, Reforma, the ALA affiliate committed to services to Latinos and the Spanish-speaking. Just an incredibly hardworking group. And Texas librarian Oralia Garza de Cortez heard me talking about it, and she said, well, Reforma needs to support this. So they became my first organizational partner. And then I was still thinking, well, how do we expand this? How do we expand this? And the funny memory is that Laureen Roy, who teaches at UT Austin in the library program, she was going one way on the escalator and I was going the other way, and she'd heard me moan and groan, and she said, why don't you contact ALSC? You know, they're committed to children at ALA and maybe they would be willing to help.
You got that resolved as you were passing each other on the elevator?
On the escalator.
On the escalator, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Well, I mean, we had talked about it before, but I remember I said to her, well, gosh, you know, I'm not getting anywhere. And she said, well, call ALSC. And then and again, there is a visual history on my site that you can see, and you'll see the name Dan Moore. And he was with the Kellogg Foundation. And he said, well, what if we make a small donation to help ALSC produce the first DIA brochure? And so there have been so many wonderful partners. And Reforma has handled the Morra Award, and we're going to be presenting the 20th Morra Award at midwinter in a couple of days. And also ALSC has just a fabulous website, and Jeanette has worked you know, with them, and they are just so committed, and it's a wonderful way for you to register what you're doing. So take advantage of these wonderful national partners and then form some local partnerships also.
Fantastic. So Pat, you mentioned, I heard you use the term book joy a few minutes ago. Tell us, I believe that is a word that you coined. So would you please tell us what you mean when you say book joy?
Well, when I'm looking at an audience, and my only regret this afternoon is I'm not looking right at the faces of these wonderful Texas teachers and librarians, because as Mark knows, that's what I really love to do, is look at people right in the eye. But when I'm looking to, talking to audiences, I tell them that those of you who are real readers know what book joy means. I don't have to define it. You know that it's that incredibly personal pleasure that we feel when we open a book. And for me, that moment at the end of my day, you know, I'm just ready for it. I'm going to relax, I'm going to learn, I may laugh, I may cry. But there are so many for whom that word does have to be explained. And I think one of the goals of DIA is to introduce children to book joy and to the love of books, so that by the time they are in 3rd grade, 4th grade, they see that word and they can tell us what it means. They say, oh, I know. You know, book joy means having fun with a book. But I certainly meet young people who, when I say, now tell me, do you read every day for fun? And they kind of look down and say, well, sometimes. And I say to them, well, no, I want you to do this every day. Not for your parents, not for your teachers. I want you to do it for you. And I tell them to go see some wonderful librarian who will help them find books about something that they're interested in. And I say, I don't care if you want to read about bicycles or horses or rocks or you want a funny story, your librarian is going to help you.
That's great.
A lot of work for librarians, I know.
That's what we do.
And I'm grateful.
And you know, as I'm hearing you say that, Pat, I'm thinking about how that use of reading and that love of reading comes from a real different place than, and it has to be kind of a counterpoint to the kind of reading that you have to do for school that is so driven by purpose and testing and so forth. It's just you know, pure pleasure and enjoyment. And I think we have lots and lots of studies that indicate that when children are exposed to that kind of free reading experience, that they will be more successful in school and they'll be more successful in later life. And so I think the evidence is in that it's not only just fun, but it's also productive for their educations and their lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Not that there's anything wrong with just reading for fun.
No, but you know, when I'm talking to high school students, I'll say to them, you know, we need to do all kinds of reading. So we do need to be able to analyze text, and we do need to be able to, you know, appreciate a good book of nonfiction and be able to summarize it. And that can be pleasure too.
Exactly.
When we're talking about, you know, let's say third and under, and DIA is for all ages, but just to focus on, you know, pre-K through third, I think pleasure needs to be a high motivator so that they develop the habit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do you have any, you've been working with DIA for so many years now, and certainly you mentioned the Morra Award named after your parents, Raul and Estela Morra. And you mentioned that, and certainly that has been a way to collect best practices and great stories. I wonder if you would mind sharing any stories that you have about DIA that kind of helps us to really illustrate why this is so important for readers of all backgrounds.
Well, there are some cute stories. You know, some little, I forget even where, it was years ago, a little town in Texas near the border where they decided that for DIA they were going to have at the school a little parade, and the students would dress as their favorite character. And they managed to get, I don't know, I think it was a costume of the Statue of Liberty, which the principal led the parade around, it was, you know, around the outside of the school. That's a very sweet, you know, memory. But I'm going to talk also about sort of a substantive memory, and it involves you, Mark Smith, when you invited me to visit some libraries when you were in California. And because I'm bilingual, I often am asked to speak to parents who do not speak English. And I remember that afternoon so clearly. We were at the library, and there were maybe 20, 25 parents, mostly women, and they listened to me with such deep attention. And it reminded me that most parents hunger to be useful to their children. Now, through the years, I've often heard, oh, you know, Latino parents don't really care. They don't come to library events. I can't count on them. And I've always stressed that we go where we feel welcome. If you have neighbors who have never invited you over and one day they say, oh, we really want you to come tomorrow, you may not go. I mean, we all understand what it's like to feel embarrassed and to go to a place where, particularly if you don't speak English, you're afraid that maybe the librarian will say something and you don't understand, and you're tired of not understanding. And so DIA, I like to think of as a bridge, and I talk about that in the book Zing. It is an easy bridge where the librarians sort of journey out halfway and the parents journey halfway, and we meet in the middle because we all care about these children. Now, I had another story that I wanted to mention, and that is in Oregon. In Oregon, some years back, they got a large grant. A library system did. I think it was in Portland. A large grant to really promote reading. And what they did is they worked, they were working on reading during the year, and the culminating celebration was at DIA, and families would sign a reading pledge. And the pledge was that you were going to read as a family 15 minutes a day. And you went to the library, and the library was all decked out. Probably the most beautiful piñatas I've ever seen in the world were at the Portland Public Library. I mean, go figure. They were just amazing. And they had bilingual story time, and they had crafts. And but they had this table, and if the family turned in their reading pledge, they got, because I was going to be there, they got one of my books. Now, that was a big undertaking, and I want to stress, don't feel intimidated. The winner of the Morra Award this year is Sioux Center, Iowa Library. They did DIA with no money. They formed a partnership with a Latina health group. And they created this event where they had, I think, some gently used books. I mean, they didn't have the finances to be giving new books. But they found it such an incredible success that they were seeing members of the community they'd never seen before right there in the library. So there are many stories, and it all goes back to the decision on the part of some professional to make DIA a priority. That's what it's about. I always joke there are people who get DIA and people who never seem to get it. I mean, you see those librarians, they get it. They get it. They were passionate about this.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely true. You know, Pat, I appreciate you mentioning that. I had made a note that I was going to add my story, and my story was when you came to our library in Riverside County, California, in the community of Coachella in far eastern Riverside County desert region, and that was quite a special day, I will tell you. And I think I had a number of aha moments on that day. That was the first year that we did DIA in Riverside County, California, and you came and joined us for that. And one of the things that occurred to me that I'll just mention briefly is that what I saw, you talked earlier about people who grow up in families where there are books and people that don't. And I think those of us who grow up in families where there are books take a lot of things for granted. And we understand where books come from, and we understand that there are authors behind these things that create these things. But if you don't really understand that and think about it, to meet an author or to have an experience like that, it was such a revelation. And there were people there that day that they had never met an author before. And I'm not saying you always have to have an author on your DIA, don't get me wrong. But it certainly was a valuable thing for those people to make the link between these things called books and the fact that they are really human elements with somebody behind them that had a life and an experience that was very similar to their own. And I think librarians have so many ways that they can do that with or without an author present to do that. So I think that ability to make books come alive and make them really relate to their lives is part of that book joy thing.
Well, and often at DIA events, the librarians and the committee have created some little blank books so that the children can create their own books.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives them, a wonderful thing to take home. So may I go back to for a sentence on summer reading, Mark?
Yes, please do.
All right. I, for years, have been advocating to let DIA be the kickoff for summer reading.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that there are so many young people who lose ground in the summer. Middle-class children and above are going to have many book experiences during the summer, we hope. It's not 100%, but we hope. But we know that there are children, particularly children, who have limited economic resources. Maybe mom and dad both work. They come home exhausted. We can, at DIA, begin to excite them. In fact, I suggest having the person in charge of summer reading at the nearby library on the committee and speaking at the DIA event so that the children know, okay, I've seen him, I've seen her, I'm going to tell my parents to go. We need to hook them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. You're kind of merging into a question that I wanted to explore with you, and that was how to integrate DIA programming into other things that the library is doing. And of course, the kickoff for summer reading is a great idea. Do you have others?
Well, I think, really just reminding them of Children's Day Book Day. I would love to hear from some of our attendees. One of the deep questions in my own mind, in 2016, we will celebrate DIA's 20th anniversary. So that we're all moving toward this big celebration, right? So Children's Day Book Day, El Día de los Niños, El Día de los Libros. And it has become known as DIA because heaven knows the full name is a long one. I have often wondered, is calling it DIA an impediment? Now, some of my friends in Iowa who have they're doing it statewide also, and many of them do not speak a word of Spanish, and they said to me, no, we think DIA is a great name. We think it's kind of cute. It's different. So I'm just going to put that out there. Does it help? Is it a way to unify all of us as we think about a year of DIA activities? I don't think that as we move through the year and we celebrate Readathon Day and we celebrate, African Reading Day, and when we celebrate, Native American Month, I don't think we have to say the word DIA. I've never expected that. But I think it would help if as we celebrate different literacy, school library week, and we're going to produce, we had one, but we're going to put it up again soon, sort of a literacy calendar where we can see all of these opportunities. Hans Christian Andersen's birthday is the first day of April. April is National Poetry Month. So there are many connections. I think what's important is that young people realize, oh, we're celebrating books and reading and book joy all year long. It's not a once a year. The once a year is the big party like Mother's Day, Father's Day. But I try to be sweet to my mom, and I try to do thoughtful things to my mom, for my mom, all year long, right? And so in the same way, I think if we see DIA as year-long, and these literacy celebrations can be, special links to book joy, but we're moving toward this culminating April celebration. Does that make some sense to you?
Are you asking me or are you asking me?
I'm asking you.
I don't have a problem with the name DIA, and I love that we've got kind of a focal point in time that we can kind of spread out from. So, and I think there's a lot of investment in that term. So I'm kind of partial to keeping it.
Good,
but
good.
if our attendees have other thoughts, I would urge you to put that forward. I want to ask another question that I want to clarify for folks listening, and then I'm going to make this my last question to you, and then we'll talk a little bit about DIA in Texas and resources, and then have a wrap up and take some questions. But my question is, we've talked a lot about the influence of DIA in Hispanic and Latino communities, but we don't just consider it a Latino reading event or celebration. Do we, Pat?
Yay, Mark. We do not. And so when we first started it, you know, and think of going back to just first realizing that, you know, even though I was from the border, I had never heard about El Dia del Niño. So when we first started, that's where we started. But we quickly realized we didn't want it to be a one-day-a-year celebration, and we certainly didn't want it to be only for Latino children. And that has been a reservation people have had. On the booklet that we're going to show you in a minute, we first produced the booklet for the 15th anniversary. We have How to Say Children's Day Book Day in 15 different languages, including sign language. We want everybody to feel that this is for them. I remember years ago the DIA celebration someplace in Texas, and they decided to do a passport. And they were going to taste different kinds of food, and maybe I think they had food and a song. So the children were going to, as part of their DIA event, they were going to have a little trip, and they were going to get their passports stamped as they went to the different little country areas. We are such a diverse country. So we want children or families who are Pakistani speakers or Aramaic speakers. We want all children, whether they are bilingual or monolingual. DIA is for our children, all of our children.
Thank you, Pat. And that's a great lead-in and setup, because I wanted to just say a word about what our interest in DIA is from the state library level, and what we're kind of trying to do here. And I'm not going to take very long to do this, because I would also like for Jennifer to talk a little bit about some resources available and take some questions. But back in the 1990s, when Jeanette Larson was at the State Library, and I was at TIA, I was first at the State Library and then at Texas Library Association. There was, and I wasn't really involved in this, but Jeanette certainly was, there was a push to have a cooperative project between TLA and the State Library to promote DIA statewide. And actually, the logo that you're looking at on the left side of the screen was an early graphic for that program. And Jeanette's good work and working with Aralia Garcia de Cortez and Pat and other leaders developed really Texas as a statewide, as a DIA state, and promoting this on a statewide basis. And I think that was a great thing, and that lasted for a number of years. When I returned to Texas in November of 2013, having worked in California and taken the DIA message out there and promoted it out there, I came back to find that it had sort of faded away as something that was being promoted by the State Library and by TLA. So I sort of suggested to our great library development staff that we needed to kind of rekindle this and bring this out again. And I'll tell you why. I not only do I think that this is just inherently a good thing for kids to do, to read, to be encouraged to read, to do this kind of activity, to discover book joy and all of that. It is an inherent good. But I'm a library administrator, and I have, as I think a number of people may listening to this today hopefully are as well. So I have other ulterior motives in that, which I always mention when I talk about this. Texas is a state that is evolving very rapidly and dramatically demographically in a variety of ways. And it is already a majority-minority state along with California. That is, more than 50% of the state is non-white. by the year 2020, the Hispanic population of Texas is expected to outnumber the white population of Texas. And it's a very widespread trend. Between 2000 and 2010, the white population in Texas decreased in 161 of our 254 counties, and the Hispanic population increased in 228 of our 254 counties. So this is a phenomenon we're seeing across the state. And it isn't just the Latino population. I was in the city of Amarillo, for example, a few months ago, and I learned that that city has one of the highest levels of immigrant populations in the country among populations such as Somalians and Thai and Chinese and people from all over the world. So our cities are growing more diverse every day, and libraries have to be in a position to respond to that diversity and that demographic shift. And so I think something like Dia de los Niños makes us more responsive to that change. It makes us more aware of that change. And I'll tell you, it's a matter of necessity that we change, because if we don't, the children that are 5 and 10 years old now, in 20 or 30 years are going to be voting adults. They're going to be adults who are making decisions about what public institutions they support. And if these institutions of ours are not responsive to these people now, we can't count on their support in 20 or 30 years or even in 10 years. So it's a matter of the right thing to do in terms of serving the populations, and it's a matter of re-examining our assumptions about what our populations are. So that's my plug, and that's why I think it's important that folks participate in DIA, be active in DIA, and we're offering that as a statewide program, and we're going to be offering it. Jeanette Larson is going to do a program on DIA in a couple of weeks that is going to explore this in much more detail, but I think it's a matter of necessity. But I also think those of you that try it will find that it is a way to tap into parts of your community that you may think you're serving in some cases, but you're going to just find a huge response that is going to just be overwhelming and very gratifying. So that's my pitch for DIA, and that's why we're doing it and promoting it. So what I would like to do at this point is I would like to ask my colleague Jennifer Peters to talk just for a couple of minutes about some of the resources that are available to those of you that want to start to do DIA programs.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to move ahead, and I'm going to show Pat. This is, I think, is this the book that you were talking about in terms of some of the one of the resources that's out there?
Right. It's a downloadable booklet.
Okay, and so you can see the link there at the bottom of the screen, and we'll have a link on the next screen to Pat Morra's web page. We will be saving this. This PowerPoint will be available for downloading, so you don't feel like you have to hurry through and write down the URL. We'll have it for you. So Pat, is there anything that you would like to say about this book before I move on to the other links?
Well, I think the booklet, we tried to make it really practical. So it is a series of lists. So lists of programs, lists of craft ideas. All of them, though, are literacy related. I'll just say that many times people plan DIA events, and it's all about adults doing Mexican dancing. Well, you know, this is a literacy celebration, and we want to focus on children, and we want to focus on having fun with books.
Wonderful. It looks like a really good resource, and so there you see the link so you can download this. I'm going to move on to some other links that we have. You'll see right up at the top there's Pat's website. There's a lot of great information on there, not only about DIA, but about Pat and her illustrious career. So please do check that. I want to encourage you to, if you are going to participate in DIA, to go in and click on that link to register your library or organization for DIA, and that is through ALSC, I believe, yeah, ALSC. that is a good way for us to be able to track who's doing what. When I checked for last year, it only looked like about 5% of libraries in Texas had registered for DIA, and we need to increase that number. We really want to get more Texas libraries involved in DIA. ALSC and ALA also have some wonderful toolkits and resource guides, book lists, just a number of resources that you can download for free to use in addition to Pat's book that was just mentioned. There's some other great resources and toolkits, just how to do it, from that dia.ala.org website. And finally, I want to make sure that we promote Jeanette's, the second part of this two-part webinar series, Jeanette's webinar that's going to be on Tuesday, February 10th. It's a little bit longer. We talked a little bit, Pat talked a lot about the why we do DIA, and Jeanette is going to give us a lot more on how to do DIA. The title is Start Your DIA Right, Celebrating El Dia de los Niños, El Dia de los Libros. You can see that there's a link there to click on that. You can also get to that from our website, tsl.texas.gov. If you are a Texas library, any library that registers and attends that webinar on the day that it happens, not an archive version, will receive a free copy of Jeanette's book, El Dia de los Niños, El Dia de los Libros, Building a Culture of Literacy in Your Community Through DIA. So that's an added incentive to sign up and attend that webinar. So there's a lot of great resources out there that are really just free for the taking and can really help you in developing and customizing a DIA program for your own library. So with that, I'll move on to, we'll see if we have any questions. Pat, if you want to say a quick thing about this book before we start looking at questions?
Well, the one thing I would mention, of course, the art is beautiful by Rafael Lopez, is at the back of the book, there are suggestions, and we haven't talked at all about celebrating DIA at home. But I do think, again, if we're dreaming, that's a wonderful tradition for us all to foster, just like we do Mother's Day, Father's Day. The Children's Day Book Day is celebrated at home, so people get in the habit of giving books. You know, many families do not think of books as a good gift, and we want to build that. And then it talks about at libraries, schools, etc.
Great. So we're looking through the questions now to see if we've got, where can you go to get the logo for the Dia de los Niños? I found it on the ALA, the dia.ala.org website. That was one place. We can put that in a follow-up link and email to you. Naomi will be sending out information about the webinar. We can put that link in there. Jeanette says, shout out to Jim Larson, who did create the logo.
I was going to say that, Jeanette, but I didn't want to be out of tune, out of place.
Let's see. Jeanette has a lot of really good comments that I think she may repeat at her webinar, but she's talking about DIA as a branding opportunity. Someone asking about some specific activities that children might do on that day, and I think that Pat touched on a couple of those, having a reader come in, and I bet Jeanette will have a lot of ideas at the second webinar and in some of the resources that we have just discussed.
Right, and in the booklet there's a list, you know, of list after list of just practical games, you know, activities, because we know librarians are busy and you're looking for solutions, and I totally understand that. I also think it's probably hard to ask questions about something that has so many implications. And I would just, you know, end by saying, just do it. Often people will say, well, you know, I'm going to do it next year. Well, the secret is do it this year. Do it this year so that you try it out, and then boy, you'll be really ready since next year is the 20th. So lead the way and encourage your fellow professionals to join us. We want you to join the parade.
Yeah, and I think it's important for folks to remember, you know, you can start small. You know, you can start with a single event. It doesn't have to be, you know, you don't have to be Multnomah County or something and do, you know, 50,000 things. This is a, you know, you can start small and build up. I noticed that we had a person from Georgia on the webinar and said that they were gonna that they found this useful, and so maybe we're going to spread the book joy in other states from here too. So that would be wonderful.
Well, and it has spread in places we wouldn't have expected. You know, North Carolina does a tremendous amount. As I said, Iowa's doing it statewide. So we want Texas there, though.
Absolutely.
And I do see that a lot of the questions are looking for practical guidance on how do you do a kickoff party, how do you do, you know, how many people do you want, what kind of activities do you want to have, and I want to say, you know, let's look at the resources that we've made available, and make sure to attend Jeanette's session, because she's been commenting that her session is going to really focus in on the practicalities of doing one of these, of doing a celebration, of doing a DIA celebration.
Absolutely, and those are, go ahead, Pat.
I was going to say, you know, I feel everything in life begins with the desire. Once you want to do it, the how to do it, there will be resources, and Jeanette will be a huge one. But it's first building up that energy on the inside, you know, and saying, you know, DIA is going to be a priority for me in 2015.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay, so I think that's right, and I think hopefully we've inspired a few folks that don't already do a DIA event to do one. I see we have a comment here that they average 600 children. I don't know where this person is from, Carmen,
Presidio.
But from Presidio. Oh yes, hi Carmen from Presidio, and congratulations on the great work that you do there. And to all of our librarians that do wonderful work in so many ways, and I think you'll find that this is a great complement to what you do. Let me go ahead and wrap it up, and let me first of all, I was negligent in thanking Jennifer Peters, because she's really taken the ball and run with this in Texas, and we have hired a new children's coordinator, and that person will be starting soon. Can I mention the name? Kristine Mcnew. Okay, Kristine Mcnew, which some of you may remember was with the State Library previously, is coming back to work here as our children's youth services coordinator, and we're really happy about that. So Jennifer will relinquish this to her, but she's done an outstanding job getting us back on track with DIA in Texas. And then let me thank Pat Morra, my dear friend, for your time today, and for everything that you've done for libraries, readers, educators, and especially for children across the country.
Well, it's been an honor. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, and celebrate book joy, right, Pat?
Absolutely, every day.
Thank you so much for attending the webinar. If you do have any specific questions that we didn't answer, feel free to give me a call. This is Jennifer again at 512-463-2214. I saw a couple of questions we did that were kind of specific. Be happy to address them. Thank you for attending, Pat. Thank you for, and Mark, thank you all for a wonderful conversation about DIA and why we're excited about it. And at this point, we'll be closing the webinar.